So, in honor of Bill O'Reilly leaving Fox News, I decided I wanted to talk about an issue and this kind of dynamic that interests me very much, and it's very personal to me, kind of because like I'm on one side of the issue versus another side, and it's this smearing of secular progressivism. Um, and yeah, Bill O'Reilly's pretty much been the figurehead of this ever since the Iraq War invasion under George W. Bush, and it's always kind of had this kind of tinge of Christianity versus Islam, from the beginning, really, and that's what this all was about. I mean, I think it's more or less just smoke and mirrors, more like what is for consumption for the general public. Excuse me. Um, but it's still very important because when you have public support for an invasion and war, it's obviously going to go a long way in terms of what you actually do there, how long you're there, how people want to hold you accountable, basically. And what we're seeing under Trump, this is like more of a softening, I guess, of the American public's taste for war, I guess, when it comes to Syria, which I'll get to later in the video. But his strikes there have a certain degree of popularity. I tend to think that most people on the left are probably against it, but there's enough support that there's like this doubt that like, oh, well, maybe he's being the presidential leader and he knows what he's doing and he's got a great plan. I don't believe that he has a plan. I think this whole thing is very either an emotional reaction to this chemical weapons thing, which I think does have credibility, but at the same time, are we going to do a military intervention over this? What is the line here? I mean, is it going to be a drone war like with Obama? Or how is it going to escalate? And also Russia is involved in this too, so it's very tense what's going on right now. But it's important to, I think, draw comparisons between what happened in the past, and we could possibly learn, and not make the same mistakes twice. So with Bill O'Reilly, right? He's had this neocon talking point of Iraq for years, and he was always one of the staunch defenders of the Iraq War, and he just basically went after secular progressives as the main enemies. Like, oh, these secular progressives, they don't understand America. They don't understand. We can't possibly be in favor of national security or all these things. Well, no, actually, I think that my policy of non-intervention is going to be better for the national security in the long run. And what we've seen is that when we get involved, we're creating more terror. We're creating sympathy for jihadism, essentially, and it's just failed. Like we've tried that and it's failed. So obviously, the secular progressives they're not getting. In other words, they're not the ones screwing things up because they haven't really been in charge so much. I mean, Obama, we can say what we want about Obama. I wouldn't necessarily consider him a progressive. He has certain progressive things that he fights for, but mostly he's a neoliberal. And so going back to what Bush is with all this, and kind of like the Bill O'Reilly, like that's the propaganda machine used during this administration. But Bush, he was very influenced by AEI, excuse me, America Enterprise Institute, and this is a think tank that they wrote the plan for the Iraq War. They were the architects of this thing. A lot of people from his administration came from here. 20 members of this organization. And look, I think we're seeing a resurgence of this with Trump, and he's becoming much more hawkish than he said he was going to be under the excuse me when he ran last year. So it's obviously an about face, right? And he went after Hillary Clinton for being too hawkish, like with Russia as an example. And now he's completely going against this, and probably in the case of Russia, he's being investigated, for ties to Russia, for interfering in the campaign. So he wants to probably make himself look like, oh no, I'm not their puppet. I'm going to try and antagonize him, antagonize Putin. So when you set up that dynamic, and that's what the press is kind of hounding him to do, it's what the Democrats are hounding him to do. Well, not necessarily, escalate so much, but what they're doing is implicitly telling him, like, what Russia did is an act of war. This is what the Democrats in the Congress have said. So when you're doing that, and you have a buffoon like Trump in the White House, how can you possibly trust that there's going to be a rational response? It should be just that simple. So, and look at North Korea, which is a very tense situation. Except on our end, we're doing exactly the wrong thing by like floating the idea that we're going to do a first strike on North Korea. Well, look, we got to think about our national security interests. Okay, we're not allowed to just do whatever we want militarily and then just say like, oh, we did it because we felt we had to. No, there has to be a tangible reason why it's going to endanger us, right? So North Korea does not necessarily. I mean, the evidence says so far, from what we can see, that they can't launch a nuke, at us. We can, I don't know, they could hit Hawaii, maybe, right? But until we see evidence, until we see that that may happen, we're not gonna launch a first strike. That is a terrible, terrible decision to make. To even float it in that way. So I mean, this is the same kind of game that we're playing with Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea. We're constantly going back and forth. Oh, they're upping their arms supply, whatever it is. They're doing another test of something. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Except I think what we're seeing with Trump is he's more reactionary again. He's someone who he sees these things and he's like, oh, okay, I gotta do something. I gotta let him know that I'm in charge. Big man, not Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, total disgrace. Okay. That was probably like one tweet, right? So, yeah, completely absurd and unnecessary. This idea that we're going to attack North Korea before they do anything, it's a preemptive first strike. These are the things that they're talking about. So with Syria, Reince Priebus, who I think is the chief of staff for Trump, said Syria and China are becoming the Trump doctrine, which I guess that embodies a few different things, because Syria and China, I don't know what that has to do with the other, but like Trump's bombing in Syria, it's escalating us with Russia. It's further entangling us in this conflict in the Middle East. So how are we going to really sit back and say like this is something to be proud of? And that's kind of like what the doctrine is, right? I mean, it's what you're known for in history. So he's becoming known for being the reactionary guy, the negotiating guy, and negotiating, I would say, in a bad way. Like he's just basically furthering his own interests. Look at with China, he's becoming close with the leader, and I kind of mixed feelings, with North Korea. Like, it might be a good idea to be close to China and have them as a better ally, because they have kind of a tenuous relationship with North Korea. But anyways, like, that's an okay idea, right? But there's all kinds of things with corruption involved, and their trademark brands or something. I just saw an article about this, and Ivanka's stuff and their products are just approved now in China. So basically, they're going to profit. So if you're in the line of public service, you have to have that dealt with. Okay, I mean, like they try to pretend like it's okay, like okay, Trump's a private citizen, so he can do whatever he wants. He's not a private citizen anymore, so he should have. And I really don't. I don't buy this whole like there's nothing he could do, or I don't know, like it's okay for him to do. No, no, he he could have had it taken care of where they aren't going to profit. They're going to get rid of everything, or at least put it in a trust, right? So make it so that you don't have any control over what is going on. But these things didn't happen, and I think they know that. I think they know that they can skirt these kind of laws, and it's very easy to, like corruption laws, and nothing's going to happen. I mean, the worst that could happen, right, is Trump gets impeached. It might be something. It might be something completely different than what I'm describing. Like it could be something with Russia, or corruption some other way. I don't know, like involving elected officials or people under Obama. I'm getting off in the weeds now. So what Reince Priebus is saying, right, is they aren't interested in a long-term ground war in Syria. So this doesn't sound familiar at all. This is not the same policy that Obama had. And of course, it's a fact that Trump upped drone strikes up to 432%, I believe is the exact number. And of course, as I pointed out, like Trump flipped, but he got mad at Obama for drawing the red line, right? He's totally just inconsistent, and like any other politician would be, which shouldn't be that surprising. Trump has kind of been involved in politics, more or less, on the outside, kind of looking in, but for a long time he's kind of been looking at running for president. He's at least contemplated it. So look at what Ivanka Trump said recently, which is kind of surprising. She said she supposedly supports allowing refugees in from Syria, which I don't know exactly what to make of that. I mean, like, is she in the room with Donald Trump, right? Talking about these things? Does he not agree? What does he think? Does he know what he's doing and he's trying to go for a different angle? I don't know, but Ivanka Trump, she supports the strike on Assad that her dad did. Because, chemical weapons are bad, right? Look, I'm not trying to condone Assad at all. Okay, he's a bad guy, but we're just making up a standard for doing what we want militarily. I mean, like, we have used chemical weapons. We arm Saudi Arabia, and they use chemical weapons. In Yemen, they use white phosphorus. So whenever we just want to say we're going to attack someone, we'll just say, like, yeah, chemical weapon attack. And, yeah, to the extent that happened and Assad did that, because there is a certain amount of skepticism, but most of the evidence seems to suggest Assad did the attack. But, again, we can't pretend that these actions exist in a vacuum. We can't just intervene militarily and not think that it has no consequences. It's always going to be messy. This is the lesson of Iraq. Again and again, I will keep hammering that from now until the cows come home. So then we go to Afghanistan, where Trump drops the MOAB, the mother of all bombs. Big and exciting. So there, the Taliban and ISIS are fighting each other, and these tunnels supposedly were under control of ISIS, and he drops this huge bomb that's like essentially like the biggest bomb that's not a nuclear weapon. And supposedly no civilians were killed. It was kind of in a rural part of Afghanistan. And, on the surface, it's like, yeah, okay, that's a good thing, right? Killed some 36 to maybe 100 terrorists. Well, I think there's a bigger angle to be had, with this. So we spent tens of millions doing that. I mean, I really feel like Trump did that just for show, and it's kind of grotesque actually to be spending that much money when you could probably do something that's much cheaper than that, and at the same time, Flint, Michigan doesn't have clean water. Okay, they have lead contaminated pipes, and it's not just that; it's with bacteria because that comes from the chemical that they use to basically clean the pipes out. It makes it rife or ripe, whatever the word is, for bacteria. So, and these happen. This happens in mostly poorer areas, and our infrastructure is just crumbling, kind of in general. We get a D plus. So, at the same time, we built those tunnels that we bombed. Amazing, right? It reminds me of like we have examples of Pentagon funded rebel groups fighting other rebel groups funded by the CIA. So we're spending money fighting each other in like different factions in our government. Completely ridiculous, right? But no, yeah, we can't afford things like free college. There's just like no reason to intervene in Afghanistan at this point. We're fighting the Taliban, that's supposedly our goal, and now ISIS, I guess. Well, the Taliban, they don't have any goal to try and attack us. They're a very nationalist group, so they want to control Afghanistan. Um, so I just don't understand what the goal is there. I mean, if they're fighting ISIS, right? Like, what is the point of us intervening there? Like, both sides are bad people in that, and we're gonna attack both sides. The same thing we do in Syria. We're against the mostly jihadist rebels, and we're against the Assad regime. We're going against both sides. But again, what is our stake? What is the national security interest? And these questions, they don't get answered. You get vague things like, this thing happened, like there's terror happening over there. But what is the actual implication for people here in the U.S.? And furthermore, how are we so certain that intervention is going to solve the problem? Because we've been doing this for years now. So if that's really the solution, then why hasn't it worked before? The literal definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That crazy idea. So it is interesting to me how the values of secular progressives are actually more in line with the teachings of Jesus, what you would think are like the general takeaways, nonviolence, essentially, anti-bigotry, don't, discriminate against people, and also just generally like what progressivism is supposed to promote is scientific and fact-based reasoning. So what is your claim? What is your evidence, right? But there's just never any kind of connection to be made with Christians. Like, they want to infuse government and religion and tie basically America's history to this like Judeo-Christian thing that they think is there but is not there. So I mean, just look at the Constitution. It's simply a secular document. There's no other way around that. So That's the basis of our country. So the fact is, actually, the founding fathers are mostly deists. They were deists, I should say. Um, they weren't, what we think of as Christian. Actually, the fact of the matter is they're more fundamentalists now than there were back then, which is kind of a weird thing to think of, but it's a little bit true. At least to the extent that, there's more people now. So there were probably like fundamentalists that they all kind of lived in the same communities, and they're all through America, and there's more moderate people. I mean, like you had people in the North throughout the 1800s that were, generally more moderate and more accepting of abolition. So what we see now is, obviously we have a bigger population. We have, um, like religion's like almost a business. We have organized religion on TV. We have constant shows of preaching and all these things. And not to say that all that is bad, but there's a certain kind of culture that goes with that, and it's this idea of everyone stays within their group. Everyone, any kind of like interracial or mixing of cultures, like no, like you have to agree with my culture. So there are no other real cultures, right? Like if you have different beliefs than me, then that is at odds, with what I think, which is actually kind of a sign of intellectual weakness, isn't it? It's like, oh, I can't be near this person because they think of things differently. So if I'm near that person, that's going to be bad for me, and I'm probably going to be unsure in myself. Well, kind of an interesting way to live your life, isn't it? Um, Now, this is where I think people would probably say, well, there's things like Antifa, right? They're like violent all the time, and they do all kinds of things. Yeah, there are certain incidents where I don't agree with what is happening. Like with Berkeley, when Milo Yiannopoulos went there, and there was a pretty bad reaction. And mostly what I didn't like was people getting like maced in the face, like just like sneaking up like behind them. Like to be perfectly honest, like when Richard Spencer got hit in the head um, on Inauguration Day, I believe it was. Um, the guy kind of like he at least approached him more or less from the front. So I mean, Richard Spencer probably just wasn't paying attention. So not to say that I necessarily condone punching Richard Spencer, which I totally do. But yeah, like at least you're giving him a little bit of benefit of the doubt, like approach him from an angle that he kind of sees you. Like don't sneak up on someone like a coward, you know. But anyways, yeah, I don't condone that. Um, it's just generalizing a swath of people that are mostly nonviolent and they want to protest and they want to voice their concerns. And look, we all know if we go down the list, there are way more far right extremists who perpetrate violence against civilians, against police officers, all these things, and commit acts of terror sometimes, mass shootings. I don't know what it is, but there's all these things, and there's not an equivalent to that on the left. There's just not. I don't know. You might get some like group of people that are anarchists and they like want to like talk all day long about like what they're gonna do, and they show up in masks, and I don't know. Maybe they have like some blunt object as a weapon or something. But look, you're gonna compare a small group of people like that to like a vast movement like the sovereign citizens movement. Like this is a movement of people that essentially just think they're immune to laws. So and those people, by the way, are mostly right wingers. They're mostly people like libertarians. Not to say that all libertarians are nut jobs, But there's a strain of people that just think they have no, that laws just don't apply to them. That they should be their like own. They should be able to declare their own country. Probably like in the square mile radius that they occupy, whatever. Anyways, people are ridiculous. So very seldom do we see Democrats ever come out and defy the majority opinion of experts on whatever issue you might name, especially big ones. So I find this very interesting. We see Republicans take very draconian stances on things like gay marriage. So the point I'm getting at is, like, we know you can't, like in those gay conversion camps, like we can't just like take a gay person and make them not gay, make them straight. No, it doesn't work that way. You're born that way. It's not a choice. So you're essentially just abusing those kids when you're doing that. And we see, you know, obviously more right wing people in support of something like that than left wing people. It's just not even close. Um, Climate change, we see a much bigger movement on the right denying science than on the left. Again, not even close. We see people on the right just like completely, they talk their way around just obviously convincing numbers. Like 98 to 99% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening and is man-made, but somehow you get some people like Bill Nye was on CNN with a climate denier. You get someone who works at a university as a professor who is a climate denier. This one guy who goes against the grain, and suddenly like he has to have a voice. And probably this is the classic CNN trick, right? What they do is say, oh well, we have to make it neutral. We have to give this guy a voice so that we're not discriminating against any one voice, and we're saying everything is legitimate, everything has it should have a public forum, and yeah, I'm not for banning certain types of speech, right? But as a business, you should have a certain amount of dignity and respect, and say to yourself, okay, we're not going to give crackpots the airwaves, because then that lowers our brand, right? And this is like a capitalist talking point that I'm bringing up right now. So I'm not talking about taking away people's free speech rights. I'm talking about the press needs to hold people to a higher standard. And we don't see that. We don't see that really at all. The drug war. Look at what Jeff Sessions has said in the past. I mean, about marijuana smokers. There's no good marijuana smokers. There's the KKK joke, non-joke that he said. I used to like the KKK before I found out that they smoked weed. Well, that's just great, isn't it? I mean, but yeah, there's obviously bigger support for the drug war on the right than on the left. You'll see some Democrats actually be pretty big warriors, like Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually is a pretty big proponent of this movement to just really demonize weed, and it's particularly in her state of Florida. She'll have very strict laws even on medical weed. So, but that's usually a right wing problem though. The left wing is very much, at least in a more progressive stance. They probably want to decriminalize or legalize weed, and there's other things you can do after that. But I mean, that's a big step just in that. So having a more progressive stance on weed policy goes a long way in ending the drug war. And then economic policy is a big one, and it's one where you would think people would be like, okay, there's kind of a middle ground, right? And there's got to be some validity, excuse me, to the right wing side. Well, okay, th- there might be certain ideas in conservatism that I'm not very familiar with, but the idea that's usually put forth is this kind of trickle down theory, which might be presented in a number of different ways. But with Trump, it's pretty much just classic, Reaganism. I mean, Reagan had a pretty complicated history, just in general. But it was still regarded that yeah, he wanted to cut taxes for businesses and the wealthy, and this is what Trump is doing now. I mean, he wants to cut taxes for the wealthy, and the thinking is, and the corporate tax rate for businesses, they're going to cut taxes for businesses so that they'll stop outsourcing. So if you think about it, isn't it the same difference anyways? It's like if you're paying nothing in taxes by outsourcing and putting your money in tax havens, and then we just bring your money back and you'll pay 15% or whatever it is, and then after all the deductions are done, it's like the same difference anyways. So it's all just window dressing, and it's a way that Trump knows some dumb people will fall for it and think like, oh, he's out there for the big, sorry, the little man. So no, that's absolutely wrong, and most economists agree that trickle down is BS. It just doesn't work. I mean, we've seen it repeated times in history. We've seen it with the stock market crash and the Great Depression. It was the booming 20s. And then we had the 80s with Reagan. We had deregulation also under George W. Bush, which led to the Great Recession. And now we're going to get another dose of it with Trump, probably. If it gets passed, we'll see. Um, but it just seems kind of funny to me how, at the end of the day, secular progressives care more about abiding by the example of Jesus, at least more than these right-wing pundits on Fox News like Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, all these people that they talk about God and Jesus, probably every day, and they're not in favor of abiding that message, welfare for the poor. That they hate welfare and all these things.